I'm Stephen Gallagher. I scripted the 4-hour miniseries Chimera, and I also wrote the novel that it was based on. The novel was published in 1980. Production on the miniseries started late in 1989. What you're looking at now are my home movies from around that time. The show was shot in the spring of 1990, and production was geared to meet a deadline so that it could air on ITV in the United Kingdom later that year. What subsequently happened, though, was that ITV completely revamped the schedule once we were in production, and so it actually went out in 1991. What you're looking at now is some camera coverage of a visit made to the workshops of our special effects house, Image Animation, by the producer and the executive producers of the show. The Scotsman there in the shirt and tie, that's Archie Tate. Archie was the executive producer for Zenith, Zenith being the production company that optioned and developed the material. They took it on from Simon Moorhead, who held it for 6 months. He'd originally seen the potential in it and developed it up to a point where he took it to them and sold it on. Zenith raised finance to pay for the scripts to be written. And once the scripts were written, they took the material to Anglia Television, and Anglia were the broadcaster who financed the production. That's Brenda Reid, the executive producer for Anglia, on the left. She's talking to Nick Jalott, our producer. He's the hands-on guy who actually made the show. And the other guy in the frame is Peter Elliot, about whom I'll have more to say later. Image Animation were a special effects company based at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire. And the two people I mostly dealt with there, you can see them here, were Simon Sace and Little John. At that time in Britain, Image Animation were the go-to guys as far as physical and prosthetic effects were concerned. Really, it was mostly them and the Jim Henson Company. But Henson didn't really do horror. As far as horror was concerned, Image Animation were riding pretty high. They worked on the Hellraiser movies and Richard Stanley's debut movie Hardware. And before we came to them with Chimera, their most recent project had been Clive Barker's movie Nightbreed. Nightbreed was a big show for prosthetic makeups and effects. So Image Animation, they had the staff and they had the space and they had the know-how. And I had kind of a loose connection to them through the fan world, and we took our script to them and we made a deal for the creature. They were given the job of the design and the fabrication of both our Chimera and the Chimera babies that appear in the very last scene of the show. The work that they did involved several stages. It wasn't just a matter of sculpting the look of the creature. There was also the design and fabrication of the underlying machinery for the Chimera head. You build the head, and then there's the moulding and production of the foam rubber skins that fit over the machinery, and those skins have to be detailed, and that's a completely separate set of skills. There's the painting to get the lifelike skin tones, and then there's the stitching in of every individual hair. And it's not just the head. There was also the creation of a very carefully designed and padded muscularly authentic bodysuit to give our creature the look of a complete functioning animal, and that's so he wouldn't just look like a carnival head on a human body. Simon Sace, he was one of the two managing directors of Image Animation. I think he and Bob Keane formed the company together. Little John was our creature designer. I only ever knew him by that name, and to this day it's the only name I have for him. With the visitors all gathered together, Little John gave us a demonstration of how the effect was put together and how the Chimera head would be operated on the set.
So this is Dougie's cast. It's been heavily worked on through different stages, and that's why he's got an ear chipped off, and he's got area marks and fiberglass drip marks on it. We're working fast, so we didn't have time to take a silicone mould off this. Just so we've got different head for each different procedure. We're all going on this one head for speed. That's his cast. This would fit on him if I can't do it because this doesn't move like Dougie. Dougie can sit here and put this on his head. The cast is made out of plaster and it won't move like this. So I can't actually sit this on his head. But you can imagine that sits on his head and flush around there sits the mask. In fact, you can see the scar marks where the red mask was actually cut. So they have what we call a fiberglass core. It has the artwork teeth on it, which when I put the skin on, you'll see how that looks in the round. On this is now the basics. And as I said, my mechanic is he's crying downstairs because he's not having to see it at this stage when it's all made all nice and just so it all looks nice. You'll see his controls downstairs. He's making lovely controls.
Very nice colour.
Lovely colour. We all love Chimera there. Yeah. There's a foam skin on a fiberglass claw. There would be, that gets glued down there, and as I said, that nice flush with Dougie's eyes, so that the head comes down there, there's Dougie's eyes and goes away, you won't see the joint, yeah? Underneath that, we'll have mechanics, all sorts of, like a wire going across there that has pulls, so that you have a loop, which will be able to move his lips, yeah, so that he can bare his teeth. We're going for the close-up head, more movement than the self-contained head, because we can run cables down the back and do more things. He'll have a squint, his nose moves, his nose flares on the close-up head. So he could just sit, look at you, and his nostrils will flare, as if he's controlling a lot of anger but not actually giving anything away. And as I say, the actor opens the jaw.
There were 3 Chimera masks built for the shoot. The simplest of them was the stunt head. This had no machinery in it other than the sprung jaw opening mechanism that was worked by the actor's own jaw muscles. And that was used for long shots where there was no particular variety or subtlety of expression needed. The next one up was a radio-controlled head. There were several motors, servo motors, concealed within the bodysuit, and they were operated with a radio control similar to that used for model aircraft. And they operated shorter cables that were connected to the movement in the face. This head was used where we needed to see the Chimera full length in the shots, and we needed facial expression, but we couldn't have any cable snaking in and out of the shot. That was a feature of the close-up head. Now the close-up head was cable operated, and that means that it had control lines that ran down the actor's back, and these were connected to hand controls that were manual operated in the same kind of way as the brakes on a bike. And the operator would stand just outside camera range, and those were the controls that gave you the greatest flexibility and subtlety of movement. I mentioned earlier the Chimera babies. I think there was just one mould made for these, and then multiple casts were taken from that mould. Although at the end of the show it's like you see hundreds of them, I think there were probably less than a dozen. And for that shot at the end of the show, the production designer built a small section of the incubation room, and then he surrounded that with mirrors and built a concealed spot for the camera to look through. And what you saw was basically our 12 or whatever it was hero babies being reflected off into infinity, so it looked as if there were an infinite number of them. For some reason, it's the Chimera babies that really caught the public imagination, and they featured on the front page of the Daily Star and in several centre spreads in the tabloids of the day when the show went out. What we can see here is managing director Simon Sace, and he's demonstrating the moulded gloves that covered Chad's hands and forearms. These are just in the raw foam rubber as you see them at the moment, but they would be painted and stitched with individual hairs in exactly the same way that the heads were. And these kind of prosthetic physical effects kind of went out of fashion to a certain extent not long after Chimera was made, because computer graphics became the weapon of choice for designing screen monsters. So this was really the heyday of image animation and of this kind of effect. I believe Simon Sace moved on and went into designing components for racing cars. So the skills were transferable. Here you see our movement actor, Douglas Mann. He's wearing the bodysuit, and he's wearing the mechanical helmet without its covering skin, and that was for a photo shoot with a man from the TV Times. And with them is Peter Elliot, who was our movement specialist on the show. The other cameraman you'll see here, that's Stephen Morley, who was the production's own stillsman. Peter Elliot, he's one of a very select group of people with a very specialised way of making a living. There are a number like him, but he's one of the top guys. Whenever there's a film involving ape action or animal movement of any kind, whether it's Greystoke or Clan of the Cave Bear or Planet of the Apes, the call goes out and these movement specialists all come together from all over the world. As well as advising on shows and advising on movement and appearing in movies, Peter Elliott's closely involved in primate behavioural research, which, from the way he describes it, is not a job for the faint-hearted. He once told me a story where he'd been in a cage with a fully grown chimpanzee and he'd been wearing an ape suit to integrate with the pack. And the chimpanzee flew at him in a fit of rage and bit all the way through the arm extension. And had that been his arm, he would have lost the arm. He describes a fully grown chimpanzee as having the strength of a giant and the temper of a toddler. I have to tell you, this was a really exciting time for me. Bear in mind, I was a kid who'd grown up on B-movies and horror and Harryhausen and reading famous monsters of filmland, and here I was, plunged right into the middle of all of that. I'd driven down to Pinewood from my home in the northwest, and I'd brought my dog along with me. When the tour was over and everyone was dispersing back to the cars and heading for home, I took the dog for a walk out on the Pinewood backlot. Frankly, it really was just an excuse to sneak around. As we were walking, I saw a doorway through some scaffolding, and we went through it. And it was like stepping through the looking glass, because when we emerged on the other side, we found ourselves on the main street of Gotham City. This was the massive exterior set from Tim Burton's Batman, the one designed by Anton Furst. The movie had finished shooting, but the set was still standing. And I remember thinking, and I think this still, there could be no better way for an arrested adolescent to make a living.